Hi, my dearest family. Today we are going to be looking at the upcoming lunation, the new moon that is happening on 28 degree of Scorpio. We are going to be looking at how it affects us personally as well as on a global level. Now, this new moon is super interesting because it's highlighting the Mercury-Uranus opposition. This new moon is actually an out-of-bound new moon, and the modern ruler of Scorpio, basically the dispositor of this new moon is Pluto, that is still out of bound, but in a couple of days' time it's going to go in bound. And the traditional ruler of this new moon is Mars, which is about to be forming a square to the nodes. So I'm going to be breaking this down. I mean, this new moon can be super beneficial because it's forming a grand trine as well, a grand water trine, basically with Jupiter and Saturn. So stay till the very end to understand how this might be playing out, both on a personal as well as on a global level. But if you would like to like have a little bit of a breakdown how it might play out for you personally, according to your rising sign, then I prepare weekly forecasts each week. And last week it was about 20 minutes long each sign. So if you want to sign up, you can go on my website. You can also do that on YouTube as well. And then you can get actually a very detailed weekly forecast, a general weekly forecast as well, depending on which level you choose. But I've got about 50 webinars also available. So you can watch them all depending on what level you are on. And because this new moon is going to be featuring Mercury retrograde, this weekend I'm going to be holding a webinar about Mercury phases. It has got 6 phases, so if you want to know a little bit more about Mercury and how the phases play out, how it affects your natal chart, then come and join me at the weekend to look at its influence. Let's get going with this new moon. I think it's a very specific and potent set of astrological transits that is happening around this new moon. It is tightly configured with Mercury and the opposing Uranus, but it forms that beautiful grand trine, like I said, with Saturn, Neptune, and Jupiter. So this is talking to us about a certain type of a shift in our lives. Now, that new moon on 28 degrees Scorpio, it's going to be a reset point there because the new moon is about new beginnings, planting the seeds, and it's emphasizing the themes of deep transformation, power dynamics, intimacy, shared resources, psychological uncovering. So, on one hand, that opposition is going to be super important here, right? So, Mercury retrograde is opposing Uranus retrograde. And that's a bit of a dramatic focal point there. So, firstly, Mercury, the mind, which is going inward a little bit. It is scrutinizing the hidden truth, the depths, the secrets, the fundamental values. The communication and the thinking is a little bit slowed down here, or very investigative, or a lot of contemplation is happening. But definitely, there are some deep questions and deep thoughts coming with this. Now, Uranus is, the very last time when Uranus is in the sign of Taurus, and I did prepare a video separately about it, I think a month ago because I think it's a very interesting Uranus retrograde this time around. But Uranus retrograde represents radical, sudden, unpredictable disruptions to our material stability, the economy, resources, or something that is established, such as our values. Now, the opposition is kind of like a clash between the need for deep psychological change and control and the need for sudden freedom and stability. So, this new moon is highlighting the tension between the need to release old, hidden, kind of like emotional baggages, that's the scorpionic part, and the urge to break free from tangible constraints. And that's Taurus and Uranus. So, therefore, this could indicate really much a unexpected event, for example, related to economy, debt, or major banks, cryptocurrency, or how the global resources get allocated. Certain type of truth is revealed here, like leaks, exposing certain type of money matters, data breaches as well, actually, with Mercury in Scorpio, that suddenly destabilizes, certain type of like institutions, whether we can trust them or not. So therefore, this is the representation of a power struggle, and it is a little bit on the intense side. On a personal level, this is an internal realization about your debts and karma, but also commitment or the need to have a radical change in our life. So there is a relationship shakeup here, for example, maybe an unexpected shift in our committed partnership, or, that could be sexual or financial as well. With Uranus, often we've got these aha moments. Aha, that's the reason. So somehow this Scorpio new moon is demanding a psychological break from the past. But what I love about this new moon is that obviously this water ground trine. And water is about emotions and healing. So this gives us a lot of healing opportunities. On one hand, it says that we can get the emotional support that we need. Secondly, it says we have to be listening to our intuition. Thirdly, it says we're going to have to form deep connections with others. Imagine this Grand Trine as kind of like a way out ticket from that trouble that the Mercury and Uranus opposition is creating. Like I said, that new moon and Mercury together is really much focusing on that emotional financial transformation. And that Saturn Neptune conjunction, that's spiritual and practical grounding of our dreams. It says that if you can dream it, you can make it happen. It also says that, if we have got traumatic experiences to release, like those karmic emotional baggages, forgiveness could be a best friend of yours, or compassion. Saturn and Neptune is blending the structure and the faith. So we're going to have a vision, but we're going to have to come up with a plan with it. And Jupiter is kind of like the lottery ticket here. So it represents expansion, optimism, a protection of our loved ones, family, emotional nurturing to a certain extent. This is going to talk to us about self-care as well. So it really feels like that a crisis, which is the Scorpio, Uranus, Mercury type of combination, it may lead to a collective, well-organized response driven by compassion, of course, and faith, or the desire to protect and to nurture. So we can imagine that we've got a difficult financial or power related problems, and these are solved somehow through imaginative, compassionate, structural changes. On a personal level, we might be going through a challenging transformation, but it is somehow um, certain type of family support, for example, with Jupiter in Cancer, or a deepened sense of spiritual or psychological purpose. It's really about sitting down, looking at, what are we afraid of? Why am I kind of like paralyzed to start something fresh? When our intuition probably telling us that, what, it can happen, we can make it happen. Intuition becomes a guide to you this time around. Your strong instincts, they are aligned with your highest good, helping you navigate all these turbulent, changes and crises that are happening. I think this is also about closure as well, because when we are releasing the past, it's kind of like the feeling of coming home, the feeling of being able to create that inner peace that we need. You know, the fact that Mercury-Uranus opposition is the second one. You know, the first was in mutable signs. It happened in Sagittarius and Gemini quite a few weeks ago. You know, it kind of suggests that this is a little bit more intensified, or this is a materializing phase of the theme that began in your life a few weeks ago. You know, the first opposition was maybe about initiating a conversation or idea about freedom or the truth exposing, or potentially it might have been a little bit more on the chaotic side because both planets were direct. Now, the current opposition is fixed, so it's grounding a conflict on one hand. It is talking about tangible power, money, values, securities. So, what's also very interesting is that Mercury was the very first planet that created a grand trine with Jupiter and Saturn. And then it was followed by Mars, and then now the new moon is doing that, and then later on Venus will be doing that too. So, you know, Mercury had an idea there, or had a realization, you know, that positive changes are about to be happening in our lives. And it came up with ideas and it started investigating that. Then Mars came around, and then, you know, Mars is about action and courage. So let's implement those. And then Venus will be joining this grand trine as well. So that's often about benefits. So I'm going to be able to benefit from it. So this new moon somehow demands that you have to face the hidden truth that is disrupting your security. Know the process of letting go is very much supported here now. So the other thing that actually I noticed is that Arachne conjuncts this lunation as well. Now, Arachne's astrological number is 407, if you would like to look it up. But what's also interesting is that Arachne and the Sun pretty much are going to walk into Sagittarius hand in hand. So, firstly, Arachne was about someone who was really arrogant and then challenged Pallas Athene that she is a better weaver. And so, therefore, on one hand, it represents arrogance. Like I said, Arachne was this mortal weaver who boasted that her skill was superior to Athene's skills, basically, who was the goddess of crafts and wisdom. So also Arachne represents competition as well as truth. You know, in the weaving contest, Athena wove scenes of the gods punishing mortals for arrogance and hubris. And Arachne wove stunningly beautiful scenes depicting the flaws, the deceit, the abuse of power by the gods, especially by Zeus, actually. So, you know, both of them were exposing something, and in a way, both of them were wrong, right? Arachne's tapestry was technically actually flawless, but its subject mattered, you know, or exposed something uncomfortable, the taboo truth. And, you know, it was talking about the divine authority. So she didn't know her place in a way. And then she got punished for it. You know, firstly, Pallas Athene got enraged by the beauty of her work. And secondly, that the truth got exposed. So Athena destroyed the tapestry, and Arachne was transformed into a spider, basically condemned to weave forever. So when we integrate Arachne into this picture as well, you know, this is about the truth. Sometimes the truth that we talk about, others might not be ready for it. Or maybe this is not our place to shed light on a truth. And maybe it can be a lie as well, you know, someone spreading a lie that is actually has no basis whatsoever. But, you know, the Mercury, the mind, is very driven now to investigate and expose deep, hidden, uncomfortable truth. This is kind of like an investigative journalism. It's psychological digging, or It's the conscious airing of secrets. But there is a risk there. There could be an arrogant communication, for example, and then we're going to get punished for it. The telling the truth could be something that is actually like disrupting the status quo. And it conjuncts the new moon. And like we said, the new moon is a period where, we are building new fundamental patterns. So the focus is on starting fresh, maybe by facing power imbalances or past abuses or hidden flows as well. Those keywords are all about Arachne. And opposing Uranus, that's like I said, it's a disruptive energy. That's about revolution, breaking free, the consequence of that exposed truth. So the system, which is Uranus in Taurus, like the economics, the fixed values, something that is established, is shocked by the revelation, and that's Arachne. And this is the moment when, the goddess tears the tapestry, tears it apart, basically. So that's a volatile reaction to something brilliant, but maybe it feels like it's disrespectful. So, on a global level, this could talk to us about exposure of systematic flaws. Like companies are exposed somehow connected to their corruption, debt, or media and the truth. I mean, imagine if there is a contest and someone is going to, what comes to my mind is like, when the Biggest Loser was on, and then someone claimed that they were pushed to take drugs and certain type of supplements to lose weight. So there could be something like that happening, for example, in the media, because Arachne is a super talented person. So it represents someone who is actually a talent in a way and revealing something that maybe they shouldn't. And they can get sued for it, especially with Mars, the dispositor of this new moon, being in the sign of Sagittarius. But in a way, you're gonna have to be challenging that inner critic within you as well. Maybe you actually feel compelled to defy an authority figure or defying your own internalized belief system, your own stories that you are feeding the mind with. There could be exposure of uncomfortable truth in intimate relationships as well. And maybe it feels like that someone is lying to you, basically weaving their own narrative. But I think there is the gift behind that spider as well. Like the post-punishment theme somehow suggests that, while the initial consequence is jarring, the core skill or the talent remains there. So it is going to ultimately transform you into someone more like smart, dedicated, or persistent. You're going to become more careful. You're going to be weaving your own destiny based on your own truth, of course. Now, this moon is actually out of bound, like I said. So, out of bound planet is when basically the sun has got a path. It's a kind of like a distance from the equator. And this path is about 23.27 degree. It's not the degree that you see in the charts, so it's something different. Basically, we are talking about that declination, which movement north and south from the celestial equator, doesn't exceed or it exceeds the sun's maximum declination, which I said is about 23.27, 23.28. So when a planet is out of bound, it's off the ecliptic track. It operates outside the conventional boundaries because the sun, the king, is not watching me. So I do whatever I want, basically. So being the moon out of bound in this chart is just really shows that something unconventional or extreme is happening, or the reaction to an exposed truth, is very uncompromising, very deeply felt. And of course, an out of bound planet indicates there are no boundaries there. So it is somehow talking about emotional freedom as well. But it is somehow clashing with Scorpio because Scorpio is the sign of control and death. So, on one hand, this moon might disregard the rules, especially with Mercury Uranus opposition. Uranus loves to break rules. Um, and the mind, Mercury, might not stop at nothing to uncover the truth, pushing the boundaries, but in a more reckless way, though, or in a very genius way, with Uranus being involved. So again, somehow it does indicate that if something, like the financial market is volatile, then it's super volatile. It's very unpredictable, very extremes. Or we spoke about those whistleblowers, right? So the information they release or the lie they spread is extreme and super unconventional, basically. Um, or maybe you are going to be very much pushed in a way to be radically honest about your deepest emotional needs, your insecurities, your fears. Because this out of bound status means you can no longer contain or hide these feelings. They spill out, even when you don't want to. And Uranus is kind of like someone who breaks the chain. So that's definitely demanding to break free from an old pattern of dependency or control. And this break is likely to be very sudden, unexpected, like it's gonna shock me, it's gonna shock us. Now, let's talk about the dwarfs because this moon is 28 degree. So actually this new moon is falling onto the Scorpio dwarf. No, it's not the Scorpio dwarf. Sorry about that, Pisces. Cancer, Leo, it's on Libra dwad. Sorry about that. So it is falling onto Libra dwad. Imagine the dwad as like a root vibration or an underlying soul of the degree. So, the new moon is focused on that intense transformation, the psychological depth, but it brings up the topic of balance, harmony, partnership, justice, diplomacy, equality, fairness in a way. So while this new moon is, doing the investigation, the ultimate aim there is to restore the balance, restore, let's say, a financial situation. Or if we have got this shocking boundary breaking exposure, it is motivated by, um, the need to right a wrong, kind of like seeking reciprocity or establishing a more equal partnership. Or, there is this emotional truth telling, but that is like driven to find a common ground. So therefore, it's about negotiating more of a fair contract. What's also interesting is like I said, the dispositor of this lunation traditionally is Mars, which is in Sagittarius, as you can see, and it's about to be coming up with a square to both nodes. So the North Node in sign of Pisces and the South Node in the sign of Virgo. So what's very like Mars in Sagittarius, the dispositor. And by the way, if you would like to learn a little bit more about dispositors, I'm going to have a webinar about that in 2 weeks' time. So you can check it out on my website. But this Mars is action. So this new moon is very action oriented. It is driven by belief, truth, passion, expansion, travel, ideology. Mars in the sign of Sagittarius is sometimes impatient for figuring out the truth or putting the puzzle together or for the bigger picture, basically. So there is that secret uncovering of that Scorpio new moon, and it's not just being executed, with like the scorpionic subtlety or control, but with the Sagittarian boldness. Because there must be justification, there must be justice served somehow. Interesting, it's a Libra dwad, the ruler is in Sagittarius, right? So there's a lot of justice going on here. But, Mars is at a karmic friction point, actually. It's at a crossroads because it is squaring the South Node in the sign of Virgo, which is our comfort zone. Those are our default settings of perfectionism, criticism, meticulous details, health, routines, being in service to others. While, Mars has got that Sagittarius urge for the universal truth and freedom, but it clashes with the Virgo need for, very careful, detailed work. So this Mars doesn't want to get tied down by logic, data, or certain type of routine. And then we've got the North Node in Pisces, which is very much about surrender, spirituality, intuition, dissolving boundaries, in a way of belief and vision. Mars is in conflict with that too, because Mars action is very driven by a specific belief system. And it kind of feels like that I have to reach this unbounded, universal compassion of Pisces. So, but it also says that any action needs to be motivated by faith and empathy, not just self-righteous conviction. So this Mars is at challenge. We've got this idealistic action, but it comes into conflict with our soul's evolutionary path. So we are taking action to expose the truth. The risk is being too self-righteous, too critical, or too observant towards the details. And we forget about why we did that at the first place. Imagine that this out of bound energy is like throwing the baby out with the bath water when we only wanted to throw out the bath water, right? So, the tension is an opportunity as well, though, because this tension forces Mars to integrate its own shadow. If we want to achieve the higher Sagittarius ideal, the action must embrace both the Virgo's discernment, and it has to be grounded and, based on facts and data. But the ultimate goal should be, kind of like the exposure of spiritual truth. The other very interesting thing that we might want to mention is that this lunation's modern dispositor is Pluto, and Pluto is about to go inbound, and that's happening on the 22nd of November. And and I've spoken about um, out of bound energies. So I'm not going to do that, but um, Pluto in Aquarius is when a planet is out of bound, especially with Pluto in Aquarius, imagine that this AI hype is very fast. It's kind of like uncontrollable. And now going inbound, it feels like that, something that got widespread it's going to somehow slow down a little bit. It's going to be integrated. So I'm talking about technology, innovation, human rights, mass movements. Those are the Aquarian themes here. Depending on, of course, which ruler you use. On a personal level, I would be using Mars, surely. On a mundane level, I would be using Pluto. So, of course, on one hand, there is all these changes that are happening a little bit too, like it's unrestrained. It's wild, most likely. It's uncontrollable. And Pluto is entering its final stage of the out of bound activity. So it looks like that those social changes are going to be more codified or integrated. Maybe certain type of rules are going to be, kind of introduced, like, so that it doesn't get, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't get misused in a way. So this is what is actually happening with this new moon. Of course, what you might want to be focusing on quite significantly, in my opinion, I've given you a lot of details here. Of course, one of them is Arachne and, all these type of energies and that's super great. But what you might want to be focusing a little bit more on is, of course, that grand trine. The grand trine activation by this new moon, it's a beautiful grand trine. Water is often about abundance, a lot of experiences. That Scorpio new moon is bringing the depth of feeling. The sun is the self, right? And the moon is our emotional contracts. So I feel like it really tells us that we're gonna have to align ourselves with these intuitive messages because they are coming from within. And that's why it's important that we are listening to our intuition. And Saturn says, if you have got the intuition, let's make it real. And then after, Jupiter is giving you all the opportunities that you need. Water is about emotionally understanding something. And Jupiter is part of it as well. That's about understanding. That's about being aware of the bigger picture. That's about, the hope that there is something better out there. It's very much about that if we don't believe that hope is, there, then basically it's kind of like I said, throwing out the baby with the water tub or the water bath water as well. I mean, with the, anyway, you know what I mean. Um, but it's so easy to kind of like get stuck with our pain and complexes and traumatic experiences. And it really feels like that's exactly what Uranus wants us to do. Get outside of your comfort zone. Go against your fears and psychological complexes. Because then it's going to be a very abundant type of energy. um, what was I going to say here is that, yes, this could talk to us about, shocking news, like I said, or, um, uh, because Mercury is actually making that opposition to Uranus, but it trines Neptune at the same time. So, like I said, this is the second time Mercury has done this. So it's not as shocking anymore. It's not as surprising. It's not as unpredictable as it was before. Yes, this might be a second conversations, or it's a surprising thoughts that is coming to your head. You know, um, but Neptune is the planet of rescue. So it is saving the day here. It is telling you that, you know what, I'm just gonna move on. I'm just gonna give up on it. I'm just gonna stop having these suicidal thoughts and stuff like that. I'm just gonna give up on that. It's kind of like coming out of a dark place. Yes, maybe this is a new piece of information that is adding to the story, and that is going to help you with certain type of understandings. Or sometimes negative things are happening so that we can be put in touch, with our higher kind of like self. Sometimes we have to have those negative things happening so that our butts get kicked. I think that's also actually very important to remember. Of course, everyone has got the scorpionic part of their chart being the most active at the moment, right? We've got Venus, the Sun, Mercury there, Arachne there. In a couple of weeks' time, it's all going to be Sagittarius focus. So we're going to have a bunch of energies there. In order for you to make the most out of the out of the Sagittarian energy. Basically, this is going to be very much about having to confront our darkness. So, guys, good luck, and I will see you in my next video. Take care. Bye bye.